It is special guest week on the OHL podcast as we welcome the Dean of the Ontario Hockey League, Mr. Terry Doyle. Don't make that face at me, Doyle. That's what you're always going to be. I'm going to trace back because guests don't get much more special than this. First of all, thanks for making time. Always appreciate the chats with you.
Hey, anytime, absolutely. The Dean, though, I'm gonna, there's Jim Gilchrist and a few other people. I might, defer that title to people like that. But okay, I'll go for it.
I respect that. We could find different terms for others as well, but to me, you will always be the Dean because I think back, Terry, I think back on my early days in this league when that was around the time the internet was in its early days and people had things called blogs. Kids, look it up or ask your parents what a blog is. But Terry Doyle, along with the excellent Sarnia Sting behind the blog Loose Pucks. I'm telling you, Terry, when I was cutting my teeth in this league, it was you and Loose Pucks that kept me informed of the goings on. Like you were blazing trails back then.
We had a lot of fun with it too, and it was one of those things that indeed there's, let's just say those people who are out there on trade deadline day anonymously wanting to say what they know things. We had stuff, but we had our name behind it. We put our name on it. We were making those phone calls. Sanai and I had a weekend leading up to the trade deadline, actually about a 5-day stretch where we pretty much decided to hunker down and decide to go through. And it was interesting because you would talk to one GM, they wouldn't tell you what they're doing, but they tell you what somebody else was doing. And then you'd go to that GM and basically, well, no, I'm not telling you what I'm doing, but I'll tell you what the other one is doing. And it was always sort of that full circle situation. So, and had contacts around the league and did that. And yeah, in the early days, and it kind of, for both of us, it opened up other opportunities. And that's why I sort of stepped away from that. And then we've seen after a while, the market kind of got a little saturated. So we enjoyed the fact that we were able to sort of move into the space early on and then move on to other things.
You know, you just made me think about that TSN commercial that I'm sure many saw heading up to the trade deadline about Bob McKenzie's Rolodex and who's got it. And of course, Jeff O'Neill, former OHLer, Guelph Storm, had access to it, and he's calling through all these things. That 5 days hunkering down, I've always thought, to have these GMs on speed dial or a text away, it'd be helpful to have that kind of information around the league. So to all GMs currently tuned into the OHL podcast, hey, our email inbox is always open. Anonymity is assured. I promise you that. But Terry, looking back on those days, and then you talk about the market being saturated, this league in the past 20 to 25 years, holy moly, has it come a long way on not just the coverage side, but the broadcast and media side in terms of, so when I say coverage, how much coverage there is and the quality of the work being done.
Oh, absolutely. And across the league. And, I use the example, and I remember a few years ago, I was in a meeting with marketing and people from the teams. And a lot of them are younger. There are some that have been there for many years, but then there are a lot of younger ones because they use it as a stepping stone in some cases as part of the whole development league, just like players. And there was a discussion about broadcast and things like that. And I said, you guys don't remember the time where if your team went on the road for a weekend, it was a media blackout. There was only radio, so which obviously people would listen in on, but they still didn't necessarily get that feeling where, like, if one of their players went off and scored 5 goals in 2 games or 3 games over a weekend and a big highlight reel goal, you didn't get a chance to see it. Sure, you heard about it, you heard the enthusiasm from the announcer painting you the picture, but you didn't get to see it. Now with broadcast across the league, your team goes on the road, a Western team goes to their Eastern swing. You see all 3 of those games. You see what happens. Your season ticket holders are watching those road games. They get excited for when the team comes back home the following Friday night. And there are people who maybe not the season ticket holders, but maybe come to 5, 6, 7 games a year. They tune into a couple of those games on the swing. They see what happens. They get excited and say, hey, when's the next home game? Oh, Friday night, we got to get tickets. I didn't know about this one guy in those type of situations. I remember Sarnia back in 07, 08, they had some young man named Steven Stamkos. It was pretty good at hockey. So that was when we had playoff series that alternated 1-1-1, not the format we have now with 2 home games and then 2 in the other city. So game 1, Sarnia goes into Windsor against the Taylor Halls and the Ryan Ellises of the world. Steven Stamkos scores a couple goals. Sarnia wins 3-0. Next night, come back to Sarnia for game 2. 1,000 tickets were sold in a very short period of time, basically between when that game ended in Windsor and moving towards the next game. Sure, Sarnia is a walk-up city with a lot of things and last minute, but the excitement of seeing that made a big factor as well. And talking to people said, yeah, I watched the game. I really want to see how they do. And eventually Team Stamkos won that series as he scored 9 goals in 5 games. And then, of course, the next series was the one against the Rangers where Mike Duco scored in triple overtime and Steve Mason backstopped them. But just the excitement and, you look at that, but that's all where people got a chance to see what happens over the course of the league. And then the highlights show up online. They show up on the major sports networks. Those are things that the whole broadcast and media landscape of the league has changed, where before you didn't get that exposure.
Yeah, you make me remember, again, going back to my earliest days in and around 2000, 2001. I'm working Rogers TV in Guelph, and we didn't even broadcast every home game because ownership at the time thought, no, if I put it on Rogers TV Cable 20, people aren't going to come and watch the games at what was then called the Guelph Sports and Entertainment Center. So that's how times have changed.
And give credit to David Branch. He
Sure.
certainly was someone who was big on saying, no, I want the eyeballs. I want people to see it. In Branch's, right near the end of Branch's last season, he spoke to the marketing representatives from the teams at their conference here in Sarnia, and I was moderating it, and he brought that up. He said, sure, I know over the years there have been people that have said, well, if you put it on TV, if people stay home and they won't come. He said, I'd like to introduce you to the Chicago Blackhawks. Do some look back at what happened with the Blackhawks. They blacked out their home games and a whole generation of fans. They weren't filling the rink. They opened things back up again, and sure enough, they filled the rink. I also go back, and you'd remember this, the CFL lost a generation of fans with blackouts because they didn't put their home games on TV. And it is a case where you get those people, sure, is there that odd person who will decide, well, I could go buy tickets for tonight's game, but it's snowing out, and okay, I can see it here, so I'll just stay home. But I know there are plenty of other people who, that average person who doesn't come to a lot of games, if it wasn't televised, they wouldn't see it at all. And I had a great story years ago from a mover and shaker in Peterborough. When I was, doing the games in Peterborough, he was a mover and shaker in town, a season ticket holder. He said, there are probably 6, 7, 8 games a year where I'm in Toronto during the day. I get back to Peterborough 6:30, 7 o'clock. I'm not turning around going to the rink. But if I can watch the game on TV, I still feel engaged. It doesn't feel like I missed that game, where if I came home and then just didn't see the game at all, I'd feel disassociated from the team. And eventually I might say, okay, you know what? Why do I even have season tickets? It doesn't feel like he missed the game. So he might go to 24, 25, 26 home games with his season tickets, gets to see the other 8 on TV, and then feels associated with the team overall.
I still think it's a pretty low cost, low impact way for the league to really raise its standard. Again, I'm old enough to remember when John Shannon came around. Yes, the John Shannon, very highly regarded television producer, to kind of coach every one of the markets in the league with their TV side. I remember going to a weekend sort of retreat seminar in Mississauga, not far from Waterloo Region, where I was working in Kitchener at the time, on the Rogers TV side, to get some training from experts from the CBC, for example, right down to how to apply makeup properly. And if you've seen my 5 head, you know how much pancake had to go on this sucker before I went on every weekend. But and I'm not knocking the model, like the folks that do the work here, but it still relies largely on volunteers. And you would see that firsthand, Terry, as somebody that's got decades of experience on the back end of a broadcast with your TV. You're a trained and experienced professional, but working with the volunteers can be challenging. And I just think we have a way to either work with them more to up their game or find a way. I still think it's a way that this league, I love the Flow Hockey partnership. Let's make sure people who are tuning in visually get the highest caliber broadcast we can give them.
Well, to give you an example, there was a situation where the OHL, was approached. I don't think I'm speaking out of school here, by a couple operations in the U.S. Just thinking, hey, we wouldn't mind picking up your games just to showcase them down south a little bit. And they were asked about it, and they said, no, we want those games that are on your TV. We want those games that are on, Rogers. And because we see the quality, and these are people who, we're talking sports networks in the U.S., and they saw that and thought, wow, we see that quality. Those are the games we want to pick up. And versus there are a few around the league that are internally produced. And they do a great job as well, but they specifically said, we want those Your TV games, we want those Rogers games, no matter who the teams are. They might be a little more geographically removed from the areas we're serving, but it just shows the quality and the people that are involved. And there are people, as much as, sometimes people use the term volunteer and immediately, kind of look down a little bit. There are people that have worked in any of those stations. They're retired from the business, but they love the business so much, but now they can set their own schedule a little bit, or maybe not travel into the big city, or maybe not travel at all, but they still want to be involved. And we've seen that over the years with so many people, and people that either were involved in the game or in some cases, yes, involved in the industry. And then of course, the other way, we have people who work their way up, into the industry. And there was some kid in Peterborough back a few years ago who was 13 years old doing main camera. That'd be me. Eric Lindros was playing in Peterborough and I'm doing main camera. So you've had people that use that to work their way into the industry as well. So there's definitely a case where, sometimes people like to take the term volunteer and kind of knock it down a little bit, but I think you look at it, who's actually involved, and, actually look at the people. And it's certainly, they may not be professional in terms of the official title, but there's definitely professionals doing these games across the league.
We are winding down another OHL season, Terry, into the final couple of weeks of it. And a lot of people are starting to throw out those bold predictions as to who's going to be bringing home the top trophies when awards season rolls around. I've heard some commentary too around most valuable player to one's team, and that's what they're making their argument based on. I think there's a reason we call it the most outstanding player in the Ontario Hockey League. So there's not that sort of regional argument who's most valuable to their team. It's who's the most outstanding player in the league. But when I look at outstanding player, outstanding defenseman, and best goaltender, I'm having a hard time looking past Nikita Klepov, Keishon Aitchison, Ryder Fedorov. I don't know what you're seeing as some of the top performers, but I think on the positive side here too, we have a number of them to choose from.
Well, that's exactly it. We don't have that head and shoulders people, right at the top of the list type of situation this year compared to, some years where it was like, no, that's the runaway winner, or we're down to two people. But yeah, I think you kind of took the three names that would jump off the page at me from that standpoint, looking at all those three have played. Of course, Igor Barabanov right there working, and Dima Zilkin, that top three for the Saginaw Spirit have been huge over the course of the year. I really, whether he would get the votes as top end guy because I think of where he plays, but I love Nathan Aspinall's game and the way he's played all season as well has been a factor for that Flint Firebirds team right from the start of the year. So there's a guy that I would certainly, have a lot of high thoughts on as well over the course of, does he get some votes? Whether it's first place votes or down ballot a little bit, but that's a guy who's played really well. Yeah, Ryder Fedorov has been great for the Ottawa 67s all season long. And then you mentioned Keishon Aitchison, talk about just a force and a guy, scores the overtime goals, plays a physical game, big time goal scorer as a defenseman as well. And I think with some of the turnover in the league we've seen with the Parek's gone, with the Dickinson's gone, for example, on the blue line, Aitchison's just been a force and, was already a force in Barrie, but then I thought really at last year's OHL top prospects game really asserted himself among that top end group as well. He flattened Michael Misa in the first few minutes of the prospects game, was involved offensively. And those three would certainly be right near the top of my list when it comes to some of those postseason awards.
You mentioned Zane Parek's name and also the big three currently in Saginaw with Zhilkin, Barabanov, and Klepov. And you got to think 2 years removed from a Memorial Cup, Terry. That's it. 2 years ago this year, Saginaw wins its Memorial Cup. They've got those big three. They've got Levi Harper on the blue line, who's very much like a Zane Parek. I don't want to put pressure on the kid, but he's like a Zane Parek light right now. Boy, oh boy, if you're a fan there in the Michigan Peninsula, you gotta love how quickly the rebuild seems to be going for that Spirit squad.
Well, and credit the Spirit organization making those moves. And just imagine if Misa or Parek was sent back.
Oh my gosh.
And they were waiting to see, going into where the World Juniors was happening and coming out of the World Juniors. I know Dave Drinkle, the GM, was sitting there telling some other GMs, just wait. If we get those guys coming back, we're going to make a move towards, obviously, you bring a Michael Misa back, you bring a Parek back, add them to the big three we just talked about, and Harper on the back end, and next thing you know, and of course, Stepan Shurgin in goal has been very strong as well. And it certainly changes things. And that's the factor that all GMs deal with around this league, is that the roster can be out of their control at times because if a player earns a spot in the National Hockey League and is not with your team, and we've seen this with many teams over the years, then you have to adjust, and that is a case. But yeah, credit the Spirit, the way they've been able to put that roster together. Sure, battling for a playoff spot, in that 7-8 spot a lot of times this year, but certainly providing some very entertaining hockey, not sort of middling at the bottom. For example, when you talk about a retool or a rebuild, having those players that can certainly perform. And yeah, you look at the group. It's funny, you mentioned Levi Harper and Zane Parekh. I was talking to Dylan Clark earlier today, actually, from Saginaw. I said, at first we wanted to kind of hold off on making that comparison. Zane Parekh, obviously a 30-goal scorer. Don't want to hang that on a player right off the bat, but it's come along. Harper's looked very strong on the blue line for that Saginaw Spirit Club.
It was a little more than a year ago, Terry, that the Board of Governors in the Ontario Hockey League made it clear that expansion was very much on the agenda. The word aggressive was used, and there were all kinds of rumblings out there about a couple of USHL teams in Muskegon and in Youngstown perhaps joining the Ontario Hockey League. And all kinds of scenarios were created that maybe the USHL becomes a US-based fourth league for the Canadian Hockey League, if you will, or more than just Muskegon and Youngstown come from the USHL and join the Ontario Hockey League, etc. It seemed to get awfully quiet for a while. And then all of a sudden, these last few weeks, Cornwall's name is up again. Chatham's name is up again. They're talking about an OHL-sized arena in Vaughan. Burlington's trying to do something OHL-sized, etc. What do you sense is the appetite currently for expansion in this league? You've been around long enough. You remember the last expansion. Is this league ready to add some more teams?
I think they are. I think this league is certainly ready to add a couple more teams. Don't go too big, too fast by any means, but I think there are some opportunities. And you want to at least have those ongoing conversations with some of these markets to see, is that discussion with the OHL what pushes things over the top to build a new facility? Or maybe, they were just thinking, hey, let's build just a nice new rink for beer league hockey and for minor hockey. And then with some more discussion, say, well, wait a minute, if we're already paying millions of dollars for a new facility anyway, why not have one marquee arena? Like think of Windsor, for example, where you have multiple pads, a swimming pool, a gym, etc. But as part of that complex, you have a marquee facility that can host the OHL and host other major events. At least put that, out there to have those discussions. A lot of those places, you mentioned a Cornwall that's out there, Chatham's out there. There have been numerous conversations with OHL representatives and team representatives over the years. And Chatham, I've talked to the mayor multiple times in Chatham. He admits, sometimes Chatham was used as a bargaining chip for teams back home to get a new arena built. And at the same time, Chatham has to decide, are they a big enough market to, handle building an OHL-sized facility, filling it with a good crowd, corporate sponsorship, you name it. The demographics there have changed, and there have been some plant closures in Chatham-Kent over the years. So, some of those markets deciding that. And I think you also want to have a couple markets ready to go, or at least simmering, we'll call it, if maybe some other facilities and cities fall behind. I think there are still a couple other cities in this league where they need to decide if they're going to build a new facility. Peterborough is definitely one right there. And, if the city council in Peterborough keeps dragging their heels, at some point, if another city's standing there saying, well, hold on a second, we're ready to go, we can bring the OHL in here, at some point, there'd have to be some decisions made. And I think that's where you want to just survey the entire landscape and see what's out there, who's really serious about jumping in. Credit Brantford. Brantford was always just sort of out there, like, oh, maybe someday. And if there was a partnership with the casino or something, but, Brantford was just always sort of simmering for many years, but I don't even know if simmering, it's a little bit of the warm up, but then all of a sudden there was an opportunity, and credit the folks in Brantford. They jumped on it and said, yes, here's an opportunity with the Bulldogs. We'll gladly take them, and we'll immediately start moving towards getting the shovel in the ground and getting the drawings done up for a new facility. And by all standards, that moved pretty quickly. And that's where credit everyone involved from the Bulldog side of it, Michael Landlauer, and now the Hyman family from an ownership, and the city and the mayor with Brantford to get things done. And that's where, looking at other communities. But you mentioned the US side. That's one that's going to be interesting. Of course, USA Hockey stepped in some of those situations. I think even the NHL jumped in to say, okay, the landscape's changing in the development model. Let's not rush into anything. But I know, for example, the state of New York has been talked about going back to literally, I remember a press conference with David Branch in 1999 heading into league meetings and things like that. And the state of New York was talked about whether or not to put a team there at some point. And we will see at some point if that does come to fruition. But, when we talk about expansion, talk about new markets, needless to say, for more than 25 years, it's been out there.
Much like Brantford, Chatham would have access to some casino money. I would hope that helps to offset some of the other economic challenges, should it be a market, because you're right, it's been bandied about forever, but it fits very nice geographically into that Southern Ontario corridor where there are other teams, your Sarnia location chief among them there. New arenas underway in Brantford. Sudbury's getting one as well. I still have hopes, Terry, because of Michael Andlauer. You mentioned him a moment ago, now having left the Ontario Hockey League's Bulldogs in the very capable hands, it seems, of the Hyman family, off to manage his NHL affairs in Ottawa, building a new arena there. Wouldn't it be great if the Belleville Sens shift up to the nation's capital, reopening that market that I've always loved, to bring back OHL to the Quinte region?
Well, that's exactly it. And of course, they did renovations to that building for the Belleville Senators to come to town. And, talking to colleagues that I have in Belleville, and they've said, yeah, we would love to see the OHL back in town. And, the AHL and the OHL are completely different, where, you get a good player on an AHL team, chances are they might be going right back up to the big club, and sometimes on short notice. Sure, OHL trades happen, there's turnover, but you can usually at least have your core roster for a couple of years where, you could sit there and think, oh, I really like seeing that player. And that afternoon you found out they've been called up. And so I think the turnover and the changes with an AHL roster versus that local feel of an OHL team. They've done a great job in Belleville with the Senators, but I think, a lot of these Ontario markets, I think, are even better fit for an OHL franchise.
You mentioned a moment ago that changing development model when you talked about the NHL kind of inserting itself into what was going on with US hockey. And that, of course, is with the NCAA rule change that we are really into our first full season of. And there were lots of predictions early on. I think there were a few Chicken Littles out there talking about the sky falling. It certainly hasn't yet. I still think, Terry, the jury has to remain out. It's a little too early to determine, if you even ever do, is there a winner or a loser in all of this. But how do you survey that changed landscape for junior hockey and that development model today?
Well, as soon as it happened, and with you, I said 3 years at least until we know, and maybe it's like a whole cycle of players have to go through. And I think it's, is there a winner and a loser? I don't think there's going to be. I think it's just going to be a change and there will be differences. And sure, we have situations like this year where a Porter Martone ends up, rather than being in the OHL, goes off and plays down south in the States. But at the same time, we have many players that have come into the OHL that would not have used the OHL as a path because of the rule that had in place where they had to make a decision on their eligibility and decide at 15 and at 16. And, talking to various players, I look at even a Sarnia Sting roster where there are numerous players that are with the Sarnia Sting because they still have options. You look at a Cameron Acoin, for example, the older brother, of course, younger brother Caden is here as well. He's an 18-year-old who came in as a free agent where maybe would have decided to still keep his options open. Caden was coming to Sarnia and so, well, wait a minute, this works out pretty well because the options are still out there. And then talking to the players who at 15 and 16, they made the decision to come to the OHL. Now they're saying, you know what, this works out pretty well that as I move into my 19-year-old year or heading towards an overage year or after the overage year, they now have another option, where before you finish as an overager in the OHL, try to sign a pro contract somewhere, or Canadian University, which has done certainly a great job with their programs over the years and, with the scholarships through the OHL scholarship program. But now here's another option and another door that opens up. And I think we see that in any industry, in any business. Anytime you can open doors up, it creates more opportunities and then decide which opportunity is best. And we've seen players, deciding to make that move to the US. That's, another opportunity for them. Some see it where they had that mentality that, well, if I go to Canadian University, my hockey side, I'll play hockey there and it'll be good hockey, but my dream of playing pro hockey for the most part is done. Not true, but that was sort of the optics that some people had, where now some have the optics that, well, if I go play in the States for a couple of years of college hockey, maybe if I get a chance to develop some more that way, I have maybe an opportunity to play pro hockey after that. Everyone's path is different, but the fact they now have another path, I think it works out very well. But we saw it with last year's OHL draft. We'll see it again this year, where some of these players chosen knowing the OHL is an option, where before, for some of those players, the OHL in their mind was not an option.
Easier to say, of course, when it's not my money that's involved in this, but one of the great parts of it is what it has meant to the players in terms of what they are being offered and or provided in this league, the OHL or the NCAA. I'm thinking about obviously Kitchener and London this offseason making significant investments in their player facilities. Oshawa just released renderings of what looks spectacular with the work they're about to do. Just the way my broadcast works night in and night out, I don't spend a lot of time on the talking to visiting coaches these days, but it just so happened that I was earlier this season in Sarnia, and I felt like a fool, Terry. I'm walking around under there going back to the dressing room, which is not the old dressing room anymore, and I keep following around, and I see this spectacular new space they have created for Sting players. So those are absolute wins, and that's something we talked about initially too. The player experience just got that much better.
Well, that's exactly it. And players would come through on tours, and especially you look at if they're coming to southwestern Ontario, maybe they're from Michigan, and maybe they got a chance to look around at some of the U.S. college facilities, and then come over to the OHL, and some of these OHL teams saying, no, we need to step up our game for that overall player experience of the dressing room area, and I call it almost like a dressing room complex when you had the gym and player facilities that they spend so much time in. And the Sarnia Sting, indeed, and that was credit David Legwand, who, of course, now a minority owner with the change with Ryan Finch and Mark Guy coming in last offseason, but literally invested money into this new player facility where they basically bumped out part of the back of the arena. It was the Sting offices, put a huge addition onto that, converted it over to a professional dressing room. And when I say dressing room, that's the whole complex, I call it, with all the things that go on with that. And a huge difference in talking to the players that, some players went through the transition where they were in the old room and the new room, and they say it's night and day. And Matt Martin was just here, of course, having his name added to the Sarnia Sting Hall of Fame. He was in the old dressing room, the very old dressing room, and it was updated a couple of times even after he left. And then seeing the new facility, it's night and day. And that's where OHL teams know that that's what they're competing against, is not just other OHL teams, but other teams in other leagues, if they're providing those great facilities. And sure, you can't necessarily compete with the billionaire owner of the Buffalo Bills who's helping to build the facilities at his alma mater university, but you can certainly step up your game in a lot of cases, and OHL teams now have doing that, showing you need to have those facilities for the players. We've seen so many teams, some teams every 5 years, they do upgrades. Some have had to sort of catch up a little bit, but showing it's so important for the players because, the league is about the player.
I know that you've been there before because they hosted in 2004 as well, but I've forgotten how many consecutive years it's been to Memorial Cups for you. I'm sure you are already making your plans for Kelowna in May.
The hotel's booked. The hotel's been booked for a while, thankfully. So, no, all excited for that. The flights are booked. The hotel's booked. Kelowna in '04, had a great time there. It was interesting. The hockey, that was right at the end of the old clutch and grab hockey before the NHL had their lockout the next year and then came back and opened the game up. That was back then. We saw a lot of 2-1 games and clutch and grab, but the city is gorgeous. They put on a great show there, and they'll put on a great show again once again. And yeah, it does feel like I've been going to a lot of Memorial Cups when I'm going to the same city a second time. Guelph next year will be a second one. Quebec City, I've had a couple there. Rimouski, I've had a couple there as well. So it starts to roll over a little bit. But yeah, very excited to see not just who's going to come out of the OHL, but for people who have never attended Memorial Cups, but maybe are familiar with Canadiana and Canadian sports, I say it's sort of like with the Grey Cup, where tradition of the Grey Cup, where fans go to the Grey Cup no matter where it is, supporting their team, no matter who's playing with it. We'll take that now and combine it into a 10-day event. And that's what you see at the Memorial Cup, where there are fans from across the CHL, across the OHL, fans of teams who are not even in the OHL anymore. There are some Plymouth Whalers fans who go every year to the Memorial Cup. I see them there every year. There are some Belleville Bulls fans, you name it, fans from across the CHL that still support their team. And it's always such a great event. And it's, for more than 2 decades now, it's been a great way to see Canada.
I love it. And it really is that slice of Canadiana, very well described. That 03-04 season was my last in Guelph before I shifted over to Kitchener. I didn't travel out with the team for that Memorial Cup. Obviously, 08 was in Kitchener. 2011 was in Mississauga, just down the road. I got to be at that one. And then 2014, I had the chance to get out west and go to a much different Memorial Cup. We would have seen each other that year, of course, in Saskatoon, which was lots of fun to be a part of. And again, you talk about that Canadiana. So strongly encourage anyone to get involved. Just on the OHL side of the upcoming Memorial Cup, Kelowna being host. But I think it's a really healthy thing for this league that we've been involved in for so long, Terry, that I think you got 8 teams that you could throw into a hat. Again, some might be greater favorites than others, but if you got 4, I might even throw North Bay in with Peterborough, Barrie, Ottawa, and Brantford on the east, and then you get Kitchener, Flint, Windsor, and Sault Ste. Marie in the west. And are you going to write off the London Knights? I don't know. So maybe 8 to 10 teams. This is a very healthy time for the league. I don't know if you want to handicap which OHL team you might be seeing in Kelowna, but what a great spot for the OHL to be in right now.
I think there are so many teams that have the capability to come out of the OHL playoffs that it is hard to handicap it. And that's a great thing. You and I remember some years where there were 2 big teams in the East and 2 big teams in the West, and everybody else got out of the way. And, at the trade deadline, there were times where teams were the 3rd and 4th seed in their conference, and they were selling at the deadline because they got out of the way of some of those top end teams. No. It's great when you have these matchups and you look at this where, if there's an upset in the first round of the playoffs, and that's going to certainly throw things off. But if you look at both conferences, and even right now, if the top 4 teams come out of the first round in each conference, and we have that 1-4, 2-3 matchup on each side, it's wide open. I think after that, even that 4-5 between the Sioux and London and the 4-5 in the East with Peterborough and North Bay, those are, I think, wide open as well. So you could argue, indeed, you might have 10 teams over the course of the OHL, half the league that has the potential to at least make some sort of run in the playoffs. That's great for the OHL. It's great for the fans to think, hey, yeah, our team can make a run for it. And where you don't have that one team that you think you're just going to crown the champion. I think in the fall, some people thought, oh, it's Brantford and everybody else. Well, Ottawa and Barrie said, excuse me, I'd like to talk about that. And they've been right there. And then Peterborough and North Bay have been hanging around. In the Western Conference, been so wide open. At first, remember, Owen Sound was at the top of the Western Conference at one point this year, and then other teams jumped up, and Kitchener continued to play consistent hockey, and Windsor's been right there, and Flint, and indeed the Sioux. You bring in Carter George, you bring in Colin Fitzgerald, you bring in Lucas Fisher, and then the Knights sell at the deadline and still hang around and make some moves from that standpoint. So that's what's making it such a great playoffs. And I like the fact it's spread over both conferences. We saw that year 17, I think it was, when we had 5 amazing teams in the Western Conference ranked in the CHL top 10. Windsor went out in the first round, still came back for the Memorial Cup, but that was a case where they were one of the top teams in Canada, even though they got knocked out in the first round because they were playing other top teams in Canada in that opening round of the playoffs. So yeah, I think this is going to be quite a wild ride when it comes to the playoffs.
I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to talk about the team that you cover, at least as far as being the play-by-play voice, and you're based in Sarnia on your TV with the Sting. Some players on that team I like a lot. I took a moment last week to shout out Brenner Lammons, who I thought has been really having a fine second half to his season. But 3 years, Terry, without a playoff opportunity for the Sting, I'm sure there is an appetite to get this thing turned around.
Oh, absolutely. And sure, they're still paying for that 2023 run to the Western Conference final against the London Knights, and where this market was hungry for that. We saw lineups around the building. So the team, they loaded up. And then, unfortunately, some of the players they brought in over the next couple of years, for one reason or another, just didn't maybe live up to the potential even the players were hoping for. And that's led to some challenges at Sarnia. And you look at some of the players, a couple of the players they moved out to make that run. Porter Martone was one of them. You imagine if Martone was still with the Sarnia Sting and still in the league from that standpoint, but they had to make that move to get an Ethan Del Mastro, get a Luca Del Balbaluz, players that have now seen time in the National Hockey League. So it's a hungry group. But I think this year's group with a lot of strong 17-year-olds, Easton Wallows, who you'll hear his name, I think, towards next year's draft, Alessandro Diorio and Beckham Edwards for this coming year's draft. And looking at it from that standpoint, a younger group, 17-year-olds, a couple good 16-year-olds, Brenner Lamans, Caden Acoyne, that I think now hopefully this group can really grow together. And I think we saw a couple of moves early on in the season in Sarnia or into the fall where they moved out a couple of veterans to allow the young guys to take over and really, do very well on this team. So, certainly disappointment in the city. The locals are getting restless. It's sort of like, okay, that 23 run was great. 24, we understand. Getting into 25 and 26, they're getting a little grumpy here, but that's the passion of any OHL fan base. They want to see their team succeed. And, the Sting have had their challenges over the years to have postseason runs. They put players into the NHL, but to have those postseason runs have been a challenge. But, I think this group, and you mentioned Brenner Lamans, especially in the second half of the year, guy who's been able to get some better ice time, put up some numbers, not afraid to get in the face of anybody. I mean, a 20-year-old who's 5 inches taller than him, not afraid to play that agitator role. I think by Christmas next year, half the league's going to hate him, and that means he's doing his job and playing strong hockey from that standpoint. So I think it's a group with some potential. Import draft is going to be huge for them and of course the OHL priority selection in general, but the import draft and maybe even bringing in a European player or two they've already drafted, maybe get them in Sarnia for next season. That's going to be the big thing. And of course, Mark Guy being the head of the ownership group, a guy, he's the face here from the ownership side, former agent with Newport Sports, has those connections as well. And I think it's going to show that, the group, it's almost like this year, as much as for the fans, it's like been a 3-year rebuild. I think for the ownership group, this is year 1 of the rebuild and now looking to move forward from here.
I still have to check my notes when you say Easton Wallows, draft eligible in 27, leads the team in scoring this year. And he's just been so much fun to watch.
And they found him. He was one of those guys. He was a late pick. They took a flyer on under the old system, you could say, in terms of the college rules. It's out of Milwaukee area. But now there's an example we talked about earlier in this discussion, how the rules, allow where he can come to the OHL and still decide on his development path down the road. And it's worked out very well. And being a very late birthday, he's born on December 30th. So you think there are players he's playing against that are literally a year older than him, and he's performed very well, 22 goals on the season. And on the other side, great story. People can look it up. Ben Pickle, an overager, was with the Barrie Colts originally, cut from the OHL, battles in the Junior A loop, comes back, battles back into the OHL, plays for Kingston, a fan favorite there, scores right there at the top of the goal list for the Sarnia Sting as well, gets a scholarship down south for Robert Morris University, and just one of those players you can't help but cheer for, just the way he's battled his way through and kept working, to get back into the OHL when maybe people had written him off, but just, he told me, a coach told him basically, you got a choice, keep working or pack it in. Well, he decided to keep working, has now had 2 successful seasons in the OHL to wrap up his eligibility, and now goes down south. So kind of the younger player and the older player that, while the standings may all look good in Sarnia, there's still some pretty good stories.
I don't know how much pull you have inside Progressive Auto Sales Arena, Terry, but I assume it's considerable. And our buddy Kenny Walls, who covers the Ottawa 67s, got me started on this the other week when he was in Sarnia and posted the picture. Can we get Stamkos's banner moved, please, so visiting broadcast on the radio side can see the clock during intermission, so, we can time things and make sure all the sponsors are satisfied?
Well, one thing I've heard they're working on possibly is either moving or modernizing the banner. So we'll see if both happen from that standpoint. I'm actually thinking of just putting a clock that's tied to this thing right in my booth, if necessary from that standpoint. If I have to do that, I may have to do that as well. But yes, Kenny was in front of me when he was when Ottawa was here a few weeks ago. And I think he took it out on me a little bit, that somehow I had some pull on this. I say that jokingly. Kenny's great. But yeah, it's certainly, there are times where I have to actually radio down to the truck through the intercom to ask them how much time is left on the clock, because we can't see it. I usually time our intermission where I can see on one of the monitors if the OHL roundtable is running in the second intermission. I look across. If the roundtable wraps up, I know we're back in 2 minutes. And then, sometimes I'll ask the truck, how much time is left in the intermission anyway? But yes, that is on the list. If we can get better food in the media room, if we can get the banner moved so we can see the clock, those are the 2 big things that we need to work on in Sarnia going into next season.
Listen, I'm not going to complain about the food. I would like less abuse in the media room, please. I come in with big ideas, Terry. I'm always trying big ideas, and you guys just whiz all over them when I come over there.
You like the abuse. Let's be honest. You like the attention you get. You're sitting there. It's like, oh, don't give me the abuse. But yeah, and you come in for more. It's like, oh, I'm going to poke this idea. I'm going to poke this idea. I want these scouts to come at me. I want this. I want Terry to poke at me on this. Let's be honest. You give it, you take it.
If you
You're right there in the middle of things.
if you I'm mucking it up like the rat that I am. You're not
Well,
wrong.
let me just say, hey, I remember there was a guy, referee told me that he had a player come to him and say, hey, look how I'm being abused in front of the net. So if you don't like it, go stand in the corner. Nobody will abuse you if you just stand in the corner. See, that's you. You stick your nose in there, you give it, you take it. If you weren't, you just kind of come in quietly and grab your media notes and maybe a little snack and then go upstairs. No, you like to muck it up in the corners.
I think all I said was hello last time, if I'm honest with you. But
You
as
deserved it.
if we need something to hang in place of Stamkos's banner, I recommend one of Kenny Walls' suits because those things should be hung in I don't know what, but they shouldn't be worn in public.
I do the Christmas suit thing every year for our teddy bear toss, and we have a lot of fun with it from that standpoint. But yeah, I don't do it for 68 games. It's just the one day a year when we have the teddy bear toss game, break out the Christmas suit and go on the ice when the Sting score their teddy bear toss goal, and have a lot of fun with it from that standpoint. Usually surprise our crew and our volunteers to see because sometimes I keep it under wraps until literally I go to the corner where I host the show. It's sort of kept under wraps sometimes until then. So have a little fun with it from that standpoint. Try to bring Christmas cheer. But yeah, I'm not doing the 68 game thing. I think when they were in Sarnia, it was a Tetris suit was the one I got to see a couple weeks ago.
See, this is the thing. Fans in Ottawa, I'm sure, know Kenny's suits very well, but fans around this league, because Kenny travels to every market, probably wonder who's that really tall guy with the long hair and the loud suit? That's our buddy, Kenny Walls. Look, Terry, I asked you for 15 to 20 minutes. We've gone north of 40. That's typical Farwell timing. But when you get the dean of the OHL on here, and I was thinking about it, Jimmy Gilchrist, Cookie up in Kingston, he's the legend. Beller, Steve Bell down in Windsor, he's an icon. You got the dean. I think it does. This all works out just fine.
Okay, we'll go with that. There's certainly some beauties from that standpoint, and the guys that you and I still have to put in a few more years to get up to their level in the Ontario Hockey League, and the stories those guys can tell. It's certainly, and that's the thing about this league is the people we deal with, and whether it's in my case now, I used to do games on the road. I stick to home games now, but the communication we have, whether like this or when people come to town or Memorial Cups, you name it. It's all about the people, and whether it's trainers, whether it's coaches, general managers, players that are now alumni, media, you name it. That's the great thing about this league is the people that we get a chance to deal with night in and night out.
I have said that for years. I could not agree more. So my thanks to you again, friend, for joining me with Dan Mahar on assignment this week. We get Terry Doyle on the OHL podcast. Not too shabby. Thanks, my friend.
Anytime.
He is the dean of the Ontario Hockey League. He covers the Sarnia Sting, does play-by-play on your TV for the Sting, and he is the host of OHL Radio. Even though Mahar is on assignment, we've still got your weekly wraparound, a look at every market in this league. Plus, the email inbox says somebody agrees with me on full-time refs. We'll get to that as well. So stay with us on the OHL podcast. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, is built for the fastest game on ice. With player props and live betting, every shift, every shot, every save gives you options to get in on the game with DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Well, we thought that the Brotherhood of the Traveling Hat had come full circle about a month ago when I got to Kingston and hand delivered the hat to the guy who asked for it way back in late December when I was in Sudbury. Allan Etmanski got the hat, but he did say when he asked for it that he would give a limb in exchange for the hat. So I thought, you know what? I won't take the limb, but with Dan Mahar on assignment this week, let's bring Etmanski and the hat onto the OHL podcast. Allan, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for this wonderful hat. I fulfilled that part of the requirement too.
You certainly did. I'm just wondering at this point if you are regretting what you said. I'll give a limb and I'm like, hey, come onto the podcast on a Sunday afternoon. Like, spend some of your valuable time with me to do this just because I brought you a hat.
It did sound like a better offer, so I figured I might as well hop at it before it's off the table again.
So, what was it about the hat initially that captured your attention so much?
So I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Sudbury when I was growing up, and when we'd go visit them up there, like we'd always sneak in a Wolves game, and they were always huge Wolves fans. And I can remember going to the game, and like they've got the best thing in junior hockey is the wolf that comes out over the ice when they score. There's nothing even close to that. And so I can remember going to the old Sudbury Community Arena, and like it's one of the rinks that still has that old style feel that they haven't gotten rid of with the rentals that they've done. It's like the Peterborough Memorial Center, the auditorium, rinks like that. They just don't lose that charm. And the Wolves have always been kind of like that second team for me. And so I saw they were doing this promo where they had the old throwback green jerseys and hats, and I was like, I got to get one of those. And it's corduroy. It's corduroy. I don't know if people can see, but like it's corduroy.
It's fantastic. And it took a really roundabout way to get to you in Kingston. That hat and I traveled far and wide. We crossed borders together. We ate French fries in Owen Sound, but I think it got to you. I mean, you're wearing it today, so it must have gotten to you in a condition that's at least something that you can still put on your head.
It is, and it's just in time for St. Patrick's Day, which works out perfectly.
I love it. And you know what? It's a great point on that stuffed wolf in Sudbury. As somebody who knows that current arena as well as you just said, Alan, I do love the old school character still in there with the wooden slats in the roof, the wolf. I hope they take the wolf to the new arena or at least have something like it because it's such a great feature of what the Wolves do.
They have to. I mean, everybody like they've done the big networks have done features on it, and everybody knows about it. So if they open their new arena and the wolf is not there, that is going to create waves throughout the junior hockey landscape.
Any misgivings on the fact that a new arena will be built up there in Sudbury, considering the number of times you've been to the old one?
I think yeah, like every arena has a lifespan, and with the way that the landscape and the needs for junior hockey teams now have changed, like it makes sense for there, and it's been a long time coming. But they're gonna miss that downtown rink where it's right in the heart of it, and it's the character. You can never replace the character. Here in Kingston, we lost the Memorial Center in favor of the new slush puppy place, and you get that bright, shiny, that new feel, but you lose something else too. And if they bring the wolf in, well, then maybe there will be a bit of that charm as well.
Are you ready to try this thing called the wraparound and help out on the pod this week?
I am. I'm ready to fulfill the other part.
All right. I'm going to start you on Eastern Conference duty, which means you get the Barrie Colts to start things off on the wraparound this week.
All right. So the Colts are saying that it's nothing serious. They're just giving their starting goaltender, Ben Horebic, some extra rest. So he ended up being scratched in back-to-back games. No problem for Barrie. They don't miss a whole lot when they put Arvin Jaswal in net. He had a 13-game winning streak snapped with an overtime loss to Ottawa. He also posted a 169 goals against average and a 941 save percentage over that streak.
That's not a bad tandem they've got in goal there in Barrie right now.
And the Barrie Colts they're probably one of my scariest teams in the East right now because they will play whatever style they have to and do it laughing in your face.
All right, I'll look at Erie first on the western side of the wraparound with 11 straight losses and a long offseason looming for the Otters. Let's look at a couple of different angles in Erie. First of all, linesman Ray King officiated his final game of a 20-year career at the Erie Insurance Arena, 250 games in that career for King. And the Otters celebrated St. Patrick's Day last weekend by dyeing the ice green. Now, I'm a big fan of the green Wolves hat that you're wearing, Alan, but I don't think the Otters should have done that. I think we should just move. Like, you want to take a picture of it and then get the dye out before the game, that's fine. I don't think it translates all that well.
No, I was seeing highlights of it, and I was just kind of like, this is weird, and it's got to be tough, for the players, but even more so for the goalies, because now, like, you're having to pick up that puck with a whole different view.
That's a great point. Okay, take us to Brampton next in the East.
So the Steelheads, they have been eliminated from postseason contention, but they did get a big goal from Jack Yates, who was their 2024 eighth rounder, and it just happened to be his first career OHL goal, tying a game against the Ottawa 67th, that the Steelheads would eventually go on to win. And they haven't seen a whole lot of those since the calendar turned over to 2026, so that was a big one for them.
They certainly haven't. And you always love seeing these players. And I know you get to see them from time to time as well when they have those milestone moments, those first points, those first goals. It's a pretty special part of being involved in this league for sure.
It's one of the highlights. I always love the first goals and the times when the kids take their first warm-ups and the guys just let them go out and have that lap by themselves.
Speaking of firsts, as I look at the Flint Firebirds next in the West, they are closing in on their first ever in franchise history West Division title. And how about a franchise record 43 wins for the Firebirds this season, as well as franchise records in points and assists for Nathan Aspinall. Flint's captain has 90 points on the season to put him among the league leaders and 58 assists to pass Amadeus Lombardi for most ever in a season by a Firebird. And how cool is that name? Amadeus Lombardi. The number of times I said "rock me Amadeus" in calling his name, I'm a little embarrassed to admit, actually.
I hope Falco gets some royalties from that every time, because he was a big part of them for years. And the Firebirds, they're one of the great stories this season that they've turned the corner. They've added some big pieces, and I think they're a team that nobody should take lightly come playoff time.
Couldn't agree more. It's been a lot of fun to watch, something we don't obviously see a lot of. Now, you mentioned Barrie at the beginning of your side of the wraparound, how scary they are. Let's look at Brantford now in the East, Allan. And look, from the beginning of the season, we were kind of saying this Bulldogs team is the team that's going to win the East, maybe win the O. It's not going to be an easy road. They're obviously still a good team, but what do you got from the home of the Bulldogs?
So Cooper Dennis, he has surpassed Arthur Kaliev for the most goals ever by a Bulldogs rookie, picking up number 32 on the season last week. And he's not done yet because he continues to add on to that. And maybe even more impressive is the fact that 67 of Dennis's 73 points have come even strength, which is no small feat at all. That means just 6 of the points for Dennis have been on the power play. And then when you compare that to the Bulldogs leading scorer in Jake O'Brien, who has 27 of his 82 points on the power play. And it's a super, super impressive thing that he's done this year.
Yeah, it's been an impressive run for those Bulldogs. Records toppling all over the place, points, goals by rookies, etc. And first team to reach 100 points this year. So they've kind of led pillar to post, and we'll see what the playoffs hold for them.
They knew coming into this year they were going to have the target on them, and they've embraced that role, kind of ran with it, and they've said, hey, if you want to come for us, come at us. We're ready.
All right, next up for me in the West is the Guelph Storm, and they will be going to the playoffs, but who are they going to play in the first round remains up in the air, and the Storm have been ravaged by injuries in the midst of losing 7 of 8 games. They played without 4 defensemen in a loss to Owen Sound last weekend. The rough patch has also cost Guelph its grip on 6th place, as the Attack have moved up the standings into a tie for that position. So things still to be settled in the lower half of the Western Conference. 6, 7, 8 still up for grabs as the playoffs approach.
And I guess if you're the Guelph Storm right now and you've got your playoff spot locked in, the injuries getting out of the way now are a good thing instead of starting the playoffs and having them unload, and then your options to fill those holes are very limited.
Yeah, really good point, and it might make them a bit of a scarier team because you don't know what you're going to get when they're fully healthy. All right, next up, the Limestone City, where you make your living, Allan, and you spend a lot of time around Slush Puppy Place and those Frontenac's. What's going on there?
So they've locked in, the Frontenacs have locked in their playoff spot, and very much of this season has been a by committee type of year where everybody has to chip in. And it's continued down the stretch for them as they've looked to chase down that 6th seed that they now occupy after a couple of big weekends over the last 2 weeks. Each night it seems that they're getting a new hero, and the good news for head coach Troy Mann is 1 week it's a veteran, next week it's a rookie. And if you're going to have any type of success in this league, you need both the rookies and the veterans to be going for you. The other ace up his sleeve would be that he's got 2 competent goaltenders in both Matt Minchak and Gavin Betts, which can get the job done if needed.
Minchak kind of came out of nowhere, at least from where I'm sitting this season, Allan.
Yeah, he's an 18-year-old kid, and they signed him, and everybody just was kind of like, 18-year-old rookie, like what's going on here? And I think he heard some of those whispers and kind of took it with a chip on his shoulder coming into the season and wanted to prove a lot of people wrong. And that head head coach and GM Corey Cooper were right in taking a chance on him.
Yeah, and we got a firsthand look at Minchak in Kitchener earlier in the season where the Fronts came away with a win, and Minchak was a very big part of that. So fans here where I am certainly have a good view of what Minchak is all about. And speaking of where I am, Kitchener next in the West on the wraparound, and the Rangers' depth is being tested down the stretch. I mentioned this a moment ago with Guelph missing 4 regular defensemen in a game last weekend. Kitchener lost a couple of defenders to suspension and another to injury. So the suspensions to Max Diricolo and Matt Andonovsky will end before the playoffs, while Andrew McNeil remains week to week with a lower body injury. Speaking of defensemen, Captain Cameron Reed reaching an assist milestone with the 100th of his career. And speaking of 100, the Rangers are on pace to reach 100 points this season, which would give the team its first back-to-back 100-point seasons in franchise history. That's a 65-year history, and pretty impressive for this to be the possible first time ever to go back-to-back with 100 points.
Since they've brought in UC Ahokas, he has done a fantastic job with his group, and him and Mike McKenzie really seem to have a good relationship where they're on the same page. And I know in junior hockey, sometimes you can get a head coach and a GM and the ideologies are a little different and there's a little bit of some headbutting, but they really work hand in hand, and it translates into the players and the on-ice product as well for the Rangers.
Don't tell me that coaching doesn't play a role at this level or any other. They certainly make an impact. Okay, you got Niagara next on the wraparound, Allan.
And we mentioned Kingston chasing down that 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. Well, it was the Niagara Ice Dogs that held it prior to Kingston overtaking them, and it was a 5-game losing slide that came at the wrong time for the Dogs, who have fallen even further behind Kingston in that race for 6th place in the East. Their power play is a Eastern Conference worst at 17.2%, which is just slightly ahead of Guelph's league worst at 17%. Ryan Robrick hasn't played since scoring 2 goals versus London way back on February 6th. He's missed 16 total games, but more importantly, I think the Ice Dogs miss him in a big way right now as well.
Yeah, and word out of St. Catharines now is that Robrick is done for the season, maybe coming back for the playoffs. So if they want to make any noise, those Ice Dogs, they're going to have that talented player back in their lineup.
And he's such a big body when he's out there, and he's got that high-end skill. He's very much kind of that same type of player that the Windsor Spitfires lost in Ethan Belchez, where he's the high-level skill, big frame, and they're hard to find.
Next up in the West is London for me, and this collision seemed imminent. Now we know it's been confirmed, and that is that the Knights will face the Sioux Greyhounds in the first round of the playoffs. What's still up in the air is who's going to get home ice, because the standings are just too close to call, and who will finish 4th and then who will finish 5th. The Knights have games remaining against Guelph, Windsor, and Flint. The Hounds will have to play Saginaw twice and Windsor. So maybe you give the edge to the Sioux with that strength of schedule, but we'll see. It's still a dogfight down the stretch for Sault Ste. Marie and London to see who gets the 4th seed.
And that's going to be a big home ice advantage to whoever gets it in that series, because both teams they're solid, and the West has been a heavyweight fight, the top half of it all season long, and there's been no off nights. And so if you can grab that home ice advantage, it might just give you that little bit of extra rest that you need to make it through that 7-game playoff series.
Speaking of home ice advantage, I think that's going to factor into what you have to tell us from North Bay, Allan.
Yeah, absolutely. Defenseman Bronson Ride, he's been signed as a free agent to an entry-level deal with the Vegas Golden Knights. Previously, Ride had been out to NHL camps with Ottawa and Montreal. Meantime, the Battalion have won 11 of their past 14 games at home, including wins over Ottawa, Windsor, and Brantford, not just once, but twice. And that home ice at North Bay Memorial Gardens we talked about in Sudbury, Kitchener, those old-style rinks, North Bay Memorial Gardens had some renos done, and it's still got some charm and some home ice magic left for the Battalion right now.
Yeah, and I was talking to a scout in Kitchener this past weekend who had just come down the night before from watching the Battalion beat those Bulldogs for the second time in this nice little stretch on home ice. And he said they're a hard-working club. So look, it's a dogfight there between the Petes and the Battalion for that home ice advantage in the first round. And you don't want to run into a team that has the home ice advantage when they are playing as well at home as they are and working as hard as the Battalion are on home ice.
And we were talking about the Kitchener coaching staff and how well that's translated to success on the ice for the Blue Shirts. But in North Bay, Ryan Houlihan, Matt Marquardt, and Billy Holder, players love those guys, and they respond on the ice in a big way.
Yeah, it starts from the top on down with Adam Dennis, and that Scout and I talked about that same thing, what they've built there in North Bay. Great point by you. Okay, over to Owen Sound in the West, and I got a firsthand glimpse at them this past weekend. And in talking to Attack head coach Scott Ray, he says, "Listen, we're not trying to stay out of eighth. We're still looking up and thinking we can get to sixth as we head into this second to last weekend in the OHL season." His team came within 5 minutes of picking up a point in a hard-fought loss to Kitchener on the weekend. Then they bounced back with a win 24 hours later over Guelph. So that's points in 8 of 12 games for the Attack, and they're moved into a tie for sixth place in the Western Conference. 3 games left for each of those teams, Guelph and Owen Sound. The Attack plays Flint and Kitchener as well as Guelph. Once Guelph, along with playing that game versus Owen Sound, will play London and Erie. So still some stuff to be settled there, bottom end of the Western Conference.
And it's been pretty much a roller coaster ride in Owen Sound this year. They came out of the gate and everybody was taking notice, and then all of a sudden there was a bit of a nosedive, and they bounced back. And I think come playoff time, that'll help them because they'll have navigated it already, been through the ups and downs, and know how to handle it if it happens.
And they do work hard. There's no question about that. Bayshore is never an easy place to play. Okay, the Oshawa Generals, you take us to in the East, and this team's been fun the final quarter of the season. They're starting to find their stride a little bit.
Well, they're starting to find their stride, and they're relishing playing that spoiler role that when you're out of the playoffs, that's kind of the other thing that teams look for, and they've been doing it well. Owen Griffin is tied with Jack Pridham for the longest active point streak in the OHL, notching 14 points on a goal and 13 assists over the last 10 games. He is a fifth rounder to the Columbus Blue Jackets and leads the Generals in points this season. And anytime we've seen him in Kingston, he's always factored into the equation in some way.
I love the point about spoiler. They really are relishing that big win over Peterborough. And, you know, they're surprising teams that think, oh, we got an easy one against the Gens. And that's not the case in this final stretch of the season.
And that's a good message for the teams going into the playoffs, is not to take anybody lightly, because you get a team like Oshawa and you think this is going to be points night, this is going to be pad the stats night, and then all of a sudden the buzzer goes and you're on the wrong end of a 2-1, 3-2 game.
Saginaw, the next stop for me in the west side of the wraparound. It took him 282 career games, but James, go. How about a career high in points with 5 in the Spirits win over Erie last week? And let's not overlook rookies, Nikita Klepov and Igor Barabanov, who continue to be among the league leaders in assists. We've talked about this before, Allan, on this show, but it's going to be a pretty quick turnaround for the team that won a Memorial Cup in 2024. You look at Barabanov, you look at Jokin, you look at Klepov and others, and it's not going to be long before, to say nothing of Levi Harper on the blue line. This Saginaw Spirits on the fast track in their rebuild.
And then that's a testament to the work that Dave Drinkel and Chris Lazary have put in. They knew that going for it 2 years ago, there was going to be some growing pains in terms of restocking the cabinets and stuff. But there really hasn't been. They've got right to it. They've filled those holes, and then they're right back into the playoff picture in the Western Conference. And that goes to show that those two, they know what they're doing over in Saginaw.
Another divisional opponent for your Kingston Frontenacs is the Ottawa 67s, nation's capital, your next stop on the wraparound.
And they were a team that has kind of surprised people this year, because nobody expected them to be as good as they have been, and especially defensively. When you put it into perspective on how good they have been this season, they've allowed fewer than 160 goals as we head into the final weekend of the season. London leads the way in league low goals allowed with 125 and 147 back in the early 2000s, followed by Oshawa's 157 and 98-99. 3 games to go. The 67s have a chance of staying under Plymouth's mark of 162 from 2000 to 2001. And that would make this year's 67 squad the 4th best, most efficient defensive club in league history, which is a big time testament to the systems that Dave Cameron employs out in the nation's capital.
I was just going to say that Dave Cameron loves a stat like this, I think, because of the way he coaches the game. But I'm glad you also said this was a bit of a surprise to you, Allan, who sees the East obviously more than I do. I remember early on, the 67s were the last team to drop a regulation game out of the gates this year, but then lost like 5 in a row. So I think it was 6-0 to start, then 5 losses. And you thought, okay, coming back down to earth, but they have not. They've been in kind of an orbit of their own through this season, surprising teams and playing so well defensively.
Well, and it really comes down to their defensive systems and structure that they play, because you look at the lineup and Brantford, they've got those big names up front, though, like the almost an all-star lineup. Barrie, they've got the same thing. But you look at Ottawa, and there's not those guys that jump off the page. It's really 20 guys buying in, playing the system that Dave Cameron has employed. And you can see it in the locker room. Ottawa's very good at showing videos from post-game speeches when Dave Cameron gives them. And you can just see that they are going in sync with one another, and the guys are buying into what Dave Cameron's preaching.
All right. It's been a tough season again in Sarnia as I look at the Sting on the wraparound, but we can look to Mitch Young, who scored a goal in a loss to Windsor to become the 8th defenseman in Sting history to reach 100 career points. Among the other 7, Anthony D'Angelo, Mark Caddick, Andy Delmore, and Ryan Wilson. That loss to Windsor, though, does mean the Sting are going to miss the playoffs for a 3rd straight year. And that's not a stat line you ever want to have associated with your team in this league. Three years out is a long time in this league.
That is a long time. And they seem to be turning the corner. They made some changes last year and we're trying to right the ship. I think the OHL needs a team like Sarnia to be into the playoff picture to get in, because it's not a huge market. It's not one of those bigger draws. And so they need them in the postseason so that they can be viable heading into the future of the league.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And a team that's got a tremendous history in this league and a recent OHL championship under its skates is in Peterborough, where you're taking us next.
And it's Easton Rye who's chasing down a Pete's record that's almost 50 years old. Rick LaFerrier holds the Pete's record for most wins in a season by a goaltender with 38, which was back in 79-80. Easton Rye, he's sitting at 35 wins this year, and he has a maximum of 4 starts left if he was to start every game, which there's probably a good chance that he might. There's not a whole lot of confidence, I would say, in the backup in Peterborough. So the chances that he gets a shot at that record are pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it becomes so interesting for Rob Wilson and the coaching staff, though, doesn't it? If the Petes, we know we already talked about they're in that dogfight for home ice with North Bay, but if you get down to the final game and it's settled and you know Rye's your starter in the playoffs, do you put him in net to try to get the record, or do you rest him, in advance of the playoffs? I think you give him the chance to set this record, obviously.
And anytime I've talked to Rob Wilson, he's kind of hit me as like a hockey guy who would appreciate that kind of moment and know what was at stake. So we would give him the chance. And if he started and gave up like 3 goals early on, he'd like give him the yank and put the other guy in just to give him the night off.
All right, let me take you to the Sioux on the western side of the wraparound, and it's all about Marco Mignosa, who has become just the 2nd Greyhound in franchise history to play 300 games for the club. Mike Oliverio also reached that milestone with the 1985 Hounds team that won the OHL championship. But Mignosa, I think, is a strong contender for Overager of the Year. He set a record for shorthanded goals. He's lighting it up scoring-wise, and all 300 games with the same team. We've talked about those milestones being reached, 300 games in the league on a number of occasions this season. Mignosa has played them all with the team who took him in the 2nd round 5 years ago.
So it's impressive for a player to play 300 games in the OHL. For them to be with one team in the OHL is remarkable, and it's a great story for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds to have that happen this year for them. They're another one of those historic franchises, and to look through the record books and see that it's only happened one other time kind of blew my mind. I had to double check that. I was like, there's no way, because there's been some guys that have come through that system who have spent chunks of time there and didn't get to that milestone.
I don't think it could be more fitting as we bring the Brotherhood of the Traveling Hat full circle. You're wearing the Wolves hat and you wrap up your wraparound, Allan Etmanski, in Sudbury for the Eastern Conference.
And it was Adam Nemec who picked up a career-high 5 points in a come-from-behind win over Oshawa. The 5 points in one game were as many as Nemec had scored in the previous 7 outings. The Wolves clinched a playoff spot on the weekend despite being shut out by Brantford, and that's because Brampton lost to Ottawa on the same night. So they kind of back into a playoff spot, but at this point in the year, you don't care how you get in. You just want to get that locked in so you get that peace of mind.
Absolutely. And, it's a team that's obviously in transition there in Sudbury, but as well as anybody, Allan, that these games in the playoffs, the meaningful nature of them bodes well for the team moving forward.
There's no question. That's experience that you don't get anywhere else. And so for this team to get them, and they're going to get a taste of playoff action as well, that's going to set them up real well moving forward for Scott Barney and Drake Berehowski.
All right, one final stop on the wraparound. We always go alphabetically. That means Windsor comes last in the OHL alphabet. But how about the Spitfires and their remarkable consistency? There was a lot of talk when the Spits won their 3 Memorial Cups over 9 seasons, right? 09, 010, and then again in 17. Well, Windsor has secured home ice advantage in the first round of this year's playoffs, and they have reached 90 points for the 4th time in 5 seasons. We mentioned with Sarnia a moment ago, you don't really want to have 3 years out of the playoffs. 4 years out of 5 with 90 points or more, that's a pretty impressive run for the Windsor Spitfires.
And this year, they had new staff in the last couple of seasons for the Spitfires, and Greg Walters and has worked well with Billy Bowler to kind of get the ship on the right track. And last year, they were dealt injuries, overcame them. This year, their goaltending looks to maybe have been figured out a bit, and Joey Costanzo's been on a roll lately for the Windsor Spitfires. And they want to make good on last year's playoff. They felt like it was maybe they were an injury or two away from being able to beat Kitchener in the playoffs, and I know that talking to the guys in Windsor that they're excited to get going for the real season in about a week and a half.
Dan Mahar away on assignment. We call in Allan Etmanski for the wraparound this week. I don't know. I think we might need to do more of this. We'll boot Dan out one week and just bring you back sometime, Allan. Really appreciate you doing this. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I love the Belleville Bulls jersey behind you. I love the Cornwall Royals, and maybe one day we'll get both those teams back in the league.
I would absolutely love to see that, and you take good care of that green hat, Allan Etmanski.
I will. I've guarded it with my life.
Allan Etmanski, you'll see him on your TV coverage of the Kingston Frontenacs in this Ontario Hockey League. One of the good guys that I get to see far too infrequently around the league. Stay with us on the OHL podcast still to come. That guy that does agree with me on this idea of full-time refs. Another milestone that the league will not reach this season. Expansion talk continues to generate buzz, and your prospect of the week still to come on the OHL podcast. Something that we've been keeping our eyes on as observers of the Ontario Hockey League this season is the fact that for the first time in decades, dating back to the 1960s, the OHL might not have a 100-point scorer. There's still an outside chance, but they're going to have to put up some big numbers in the final weekend of the season in order to reach that century mark. So just something to keep our eyes on. But here's something that has not happened in 13 seasons that we know is not going to happen this year, and that is no OHL team will reach 50 wins. The math just doesn't allow for it anymore. And consider, in the 12 straight years that teams have reached the 50-win mark in a season, they even did so in 2019-2020, the season that got cut short by 4 or 5 games by the COVID-19 pandemic. So just give that some thought. No 50-win team in the OHL this season. During the 12 straight years that 50 wins were reached, the London Knights helped out, getting there 4 times. Erie also did it 4 times, and Ottawa did it 3 times. But in this season, both Brantford and Kitchener could reach 49 wins, which incidentally is the mark reached, 49 wins, the last time there was not a 50-win team in the OHL. That takes us back to 2011, 2012. But interesting that this year there will not be a 50-win team in the Ontario Hockey League for the first time since 2011, 2012. Okay, let's dive into that OHL email box. And I've told you a couple of times already this week on the show that somebody did agree with me. So I have to at least acknowledge the email from Lowell to ohlpodcast at Rogers.com. Lowell says, on the topic of full time referees from the perspective of a former referee, which Lowell is, imagine not having to worry about your day job, stuff like project deadlines, missing too many hours, booking vacation, and all of the other stresses involved with working. Officials would have a clearer mind and be more prepared for games. It's not that they aren't now, but it's just part of who they are. And time and stress can really affect their performance. Other things to consider: better skating fitness and positioning, more video review and rule training, greater consistency between games, and easier discipline and evaluation. That email from Lowell to ohlpodcast at Rogers.com. Look, for all of the reasons that Lowell lists are the reasons that I made the argument that, hey, could we consider full-time officials in the Ontario Hockey League? I know that financially it becomes a really tough nut to crack, but it's at least something to think about. And certainly when you consider the advantages that come with it, you can see why some knuckleheads like me might make the argument. And this email from Jeff: hey guys, I love your take on expansion. I just hope that the league doesn't get seduced into the GTA again by some billionaire with a fancy new rink to play in. We've seen it before with the GTA. No one cares about the team. They have no connection to the community. There's no fan base, and the seats stay empty. It's ugly. Smaller communities like Chatham, Cornwall, Thunder Bay, Belleville make more sense. So I agree 100% with you guys. They're far more likely to be viable markets than the GTA is. Let's hope whatever the league does, they look at market viability or whatever it's called, and it works out this time. That email from Jeff in Lindsay. Appreciate the email, Jeff. We talked last week about Cornwall, a couple of weeks ago about Cornwall, then Chatham. Here's just an update on the Chatham situation as well. OHL Commissioner Brian Crawford met virtually with the mayor of Chatham, Kent, and a couple of the counselors who have expressed interest before in bringing an OHL team to Chatham. And then there were all kinds of accusations and critics about backdoor deals and not everybody being involved in this and whatnot. So mark down March the 23rd, next Monday, on your calendar, because that's when OHL Commissioner Brian Crawford is going to appear before the entirety of Chatham Kent Council and explain his vision for OHL expansion and how Chatham might fit into that. So if we're paying attention, and all of these municipal council meetings, I know it sounds kind of boring, but they're streamed online, and you'll be able to follow and get a sense of what the commissioner thinks the vision is for expansion in this Ontario Hockey League. So I think that makes it a little bit of must-watch TV for us as we head into the OHL playoffs. So again, on Monday, March the 23rd, OHL Commissioner Brian Crawford speaking to all of Chatham Kent Council publicly on the record, so there are no accusations of behind the scenes deals or backroom deals happening. Just to Jeff's point on the GTA, I don't think that the league is all that interested in leaving the market. I think it wants to have a footprint there for a variety of reasons. I think there is a little bit of prestige that comes with it, no matter how many fans show up. Look, the GTHL as a minor hockey league is incredibly successful, a lot of money in there, a lot of players involved in the game. So if you keep the OHL that close to their homes in the greater Toronto area, it's probably a good thing. I don't love it from an optics perspective either. And I couldn't agree more that smaller markets, that's kind of the purity argument for the Ontario Hockey League and the markets that it competes in. But I don't think it's leaving the OHL, the GTA, anytime soon. But I would love to see Cornwall return as a market. I'd love to see Chatham enter as a market. I think there's a chance that someday down the road, when the AHL's Senators move into the nation's capital, perhaps right near the big club, Belleville reopens as a potential OHL market. And I'm not giving up on my dreams of the North. I think that, look, if we can put a team in Newfoundland in the CHL and we look at the travel schedules for the Q and the Dub, there's no reason we can't travel a little further into our north here in Ontario, maybe even Thunder Bay, to consider the prospects for expansion. One final thing, we always wrap up our weekly podcast with a look at the prospects of the week. In Dan's absence, I'll just give you the one that I had my eyes on. And Allan Etmanski alluded to this during the wraparound when he joined us this week. I'm looking at a goaltender, and I can't look past Arvind Jaswal of the Barrie Colts, a 13-game winning streak that dated all the way back to November the 28th. So he went almost 3 months through 13 starts without a loss. And over that time, how about a 169 goals against average and a save percentage above 940? Jaswal only turns 18 next week. I know goaltenders are always tough to predict. They blossom later, but for my eyes, in the past little bit, Arvind Jaswal is certainly worthy of consideration as the prospect of the week. And that'll do it for another week here on the pod. Please make sure you stay in touch with us. We love the interaction. Drop a comment on our YouTube channel or wherever it is you listen to this podcast. Send an email anytime, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. And find us all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, the OHL Podcast. Catch up with me on X as well, @Farwell_OHL. We'll bring Dan Mahar back from assignment, and we'll be back in your ears next Tuesday morning, right here on the OHL Podcast.